How do you end a game with Oldhim?
Well, you do what Guardian does best, Andy, and that is that you swing out hard. Bobbleheads here with you for another video. I'm Michael, and I have with me, as always, Andy. And today, what we will be doing is a deep dive of Oldhim. We just got done with the pre-release weekend, and if you haven't seen our primer videos for that, please go back and watch them. They're a really good general overview if you're just looking for a quick way to get into Limited for the Tales of Aria expansion. But with that said, we are preparing for the Calling Dallas, which is next month, October 15th through the 17th. And we want to be super prepared. So we're going to do a deep dive video for each of the three heroes in order to be ready for that event. And with that said, let's go ahead and cover Oldhim. Andy, take it away.
Hi, thanks. Oldhim is an Elemental Guardian hero. He is our first Elemental Guardian. He's our second Guardian. We're looking at the young version here, and he has the essence of ice and earth, which means he's missing the essence of lightning. He cannot play lightning cards. And without lightning, that means Oldhim generally wants to be setting up one really, really big, maybe dominated, powerful attack per turn. He doesn't have a lot of go again, and especially in a set with Fuse, that leads to some interesting play patterns. So if you think about it, you're going to attack with a card, and if it has Fusion, you're going to want a card in hand left over to reveal to the Fuse, and then you're not going to be able to play it because he doesn't have go again. And so probably the best thing you can do with that card is arsenal it, so you can still draw the full 4 at the end of your turn, which means you should really be prioritizing essence cards that benefit from being played from arsenal. Yep. We have Evergreen, which we can see here. If it's played from Arsenal, you put it on the bottom of your deck when the combat chain closes. So this is a powerful attack that you get to recur and use multiple times over the course of the game. We have Polar Blast. If you lead this off on your next turn, then you get to play this from Arsenal, draw a card. This does have go again, and then you can start to chain effects that way. One of the cards that this might want to make you devalue a little bit is an essence card that's like Icy Encounter, where maybe you hold it in hand to reveal it to Fuse, but then you're stuck with an icy encounter in your hand, and you don't really want to put it in your arsenal because you don't want to necessarily attack with it because you'll probably have better things to do with your attacks. Break Ground is another one for the earth side of things, where it doesn't really do much good. Once it's in your arsenal, you don't want to just keep it in hand because then you're not drawing the full 4 cards, not taking advantage of your ability to gain card advantage at the end of your turn. So with that in mind, I don't know how to throw it back to you, but.
Yeah. So, well, speaking of Fusion and how it kind of affects the format, this applies to every hero. What we found in our play during the past weekend, and what I think we'll continue to discover as we play more, is that it's really hard to block in this format for a few reasons, one of which is you need a pretty full hand to trigger Fuse. And you also need to remember that, especially when playing Oldhim, his cards are really expensive. There are a lot of cards that cost 4 or more to attack, and while they look great, it can be really hard to be able to play out a full hand and Fuse with something that costs 4 because you're already having to pitch at least 2 of your cards. Another example is, if you're playing Lexi or Briar with Lightning cards, you're going to want to be able to use the Go Again mechanic that Lightning offers you. And if you're looking to play multiple cards, there's a good chance that you're not going to be able to get to Fuse at the end of that chain. And so with that said, let's go ahead and move to some more details about how Oldhim works with both Earth and Ice. And something that we talked about in our video, our pre-release primer, we valued ice cards a whole lot. I think with both Lexi and Oldhim, we recommended ice cards on both of them. There was a little bit of overlap, and even the cards that didn't overlap that maybe were Guardian specific, they were ice cards. And so, we were both really big going into this on ice, and I feel the same after having played a little bit. With that said, let's take a moment to at least give credit where it's due with some of the ice cards. Earth cards. Yeah. Let's give a little credit to some of the Earth cards that are worth taking if you're lucky enough to draw them. A good example of one that I was lucky enough to pull in my Oldhim sealed this past weekend was Channel Mount Heroic. It is a majestic. You should not expect to pull it, but if you do, it's a really good auto include for any ice deck or earth deck. So that means Oldhim or Briar. Another example is Tome of Harvests. It's a pitch 3, so it's always going to be useful, even if you can't get the best value out of it. But you get to draw 3 cards and go again. And as we'll mention time and time again, if you're playing a game where your hand size is 4, any amount of card draw is going to be huge for enabling big, big plays. I found that to be true with any of the Arsenal cards that we'll talk about later that allow you to draw a card. And drawing 3 is just awesome. And again, this is a majestic card, so don't count on it if you're looking to play Oldhim. But if you are playing Oldhim and you draft this, definitely include it. And so what we've kind of noticed in the overall picture is that there's a lot of really good ice cards, but there are some earth cards that compensate by just being amazing, this included. And we kind of have a sneaking suspicion that to balance things out, it looks like LSS probably did that to balance out how weak the earth commons and rares are, but it pays off in spades if you're able to include some of these majestics.
Yeah, a lot of the commons in the Earth Essence, they really focus on sort of recursion and setting up the bottom of your deck. We can look at So Tomorrow. And in a lot of formats, that'd be great. You wind up getting to the bottom of your deck and you want to be able to set up good attacks. You want to pay attention to what you're pitching so you can make sure you have hands that are powerful and effective. But in this format, it's just so aggressive. And like you said, it's really, really hard to block. Even for all the heroes, they want to be playing with full hands and avoiding blocking if at all possible. And so you don't wind up getting through your entire deck, and that recursion and the sort of sculpting of your remaining cards is not really as valuable. And that winds up making Earth not very valuable because that's really what the focus is for a lot of those cards.
Yep.
One thing that Earth is able to do, Oldhim is probably the best hero at blocking. You can use his hero ability to prevent 2 damage using an Earth card. But then also there's cards like Summerwood Shelter. This is a great rate. We've talked before about how something that costs 0 and can attack for 4 is just the most efficient thing you can do. Mm-hmm. This is a card that costs 0 and can effectively block for 4. It's a great rate. It's also one of the few ways to cheat Dominate because you are targeting the defending card. You are not adding another card to defend. So you can play this. You can block with 1 card with Dominate and then use this to buff that card rather than trying to block with multiple cards, which obviously you can't do. This is especially powerful in the mirror because Oldhim is most likely to be attacking for 6 or more, which this would get even a 2 block up to 6. It's useful against all the heroes, though. There's plenty of dominated and big attacks from any of the heroes.
Yeah, definitely.
I also don't really feel like the Earth fusion cards that Oldhim has access to really reward you for going heavy on Earth. There are some like Turn Timber, which is great without fusing. I mean, I would already play a 2-cost 6 block. I mean, that's a huge defense reaction.
Yeah, I know I did. I ran this, and even when I wasn't able to fuse, it still felt great, which is kind of going to be a theme that we talk about for things that you can include in your decks is cards that you don't even need to fuse to just feel really good about are going to be awesome. So this is a great card.
And then there's a card like Entangle that would kind of be underwhelming regardless, and the ability to fuse, I'd rather have it than not, but it honestly doesn't move the needle that much for me. Yeah. If I'm playing this, I'm playing it because I need something that attacks for 7, not because I need something that can devalue their next attack.
Right.
I do like to be able to use Oldhim's defense reaction ability, so it is pretty important to especially focus on the blue pitch Earth cards.
Oh, yeah.
I actually won a game that way in one of our pre-releases. It did become just kind of a grind fest, and I got to where I had 2 cards left in hand. One was a blue pitch ice card, I think, and one was a blue pitch earth card. Mm-hmm. My opponent had like 5 cards, but they weren't attacks, and so we were just trading weapon attacks back and forth. And He would attack with his Rosetta Thorn. He was on Briar. And I would be able to pitch the Earth card, block it, or prevent the damage, and then pitch the other card, attack with my hammer, draw them both back up, and just repeat the process. And eventually he got to where he was having to block my hammer with one of his cards every turn, and I just wore him down one card at a time and eventually won the game.
Nice.
But games that come down to attrition like that are not the rule in this format. That is very much the exception. So being able to use an Earth card to block for 2 or prevent 2 damage is great, but it's not a ton better than just blocking for 2, which a lot of the Earth cards are able to do.
As we mentioned before, Ice is really strong on Oldhim, and it's not just because the Ice cards are particularly spectacular or anything like that, but really because the Guardian cards with Ice Fusion are so strong. A good example of this is Snow Under. Again, you can swing for 7 on a bad day, which is pretty good for parity. And like we said, any card that's just solid in its own right and consistent is great. If it's already good and it has more upside in certain situations, then awesome. Another example of that is going to be Emerging Avalanche. So this is an Ice Fusion card with Go Again, which sets up some really, really good plays. And it allows you to make your next turn even stronger, which we know with Guardian, all he's looking to do is set up the biggest, strongest plays. And so by using something like this to set that up is great, with yet another upside. So with that said, I wanted to take a second and talk about Frostfang. In the previous video, I brought it up as kind of one of my unsung heroes, a card I didn't really expect to be all that powerful. But in both my Lexi and my Oldhim sealed draws in the pools, I was really happy with it. The ability to set up, when your goal is to set up these really big 4 or 5 card turns, it's really valuable to be able to say, no matter what, I'm going to play Frostfang and I'm going to get a card out of your hand. So that way next turn I can take a beat and I can afford to block because I know you're going to have fewer resources. So the ability to do that was great. The same is true for Winter's Bite, but it's not quite as good because it's... with Frostfang, you're also attacking and kind of threatening their life total. But, you can't go wrong with this card as well. We're either making them discard or pitch 3, which is effectively the same. And so, I was a huge fan of these cards that allowed you that weren't necessarily in the theme of just swinging hard, but really allowed you to do that and enabled you to do what you wanted to do. Another thing to remember is that you don't want to forget about using Oldhim's Ice Hero ability. I definitely was joking. I kept reading it as like a, pitch and block 2 damage. And that's not all Oldhim says. The second part says, but if you pitch for an ice card, then, golly, I just totally blanked.
You make them put a card back on top of their deck.
Right, which is the whole theme of what we're talking about. Any ability to control the opponent's hand and set yourself up well for the next turn is ideal. So if you pitch that ice card, you're able to put a card on top of their hand. They're playing with 1 fewer card. If you pitch an earth card, you're blocking 2 damage. The undervalued for sure of being able to manage their hand and at least trade 1 card for 1 if you're not doing anything else that turn. Again, the kind of big theme here is that these ice cards are phenomenal at doing a little bit of control and swinging through big. And if you get the rare earth stuff as well, it's great. But you can pretty much expect that most of your Oldhim builds are going to focus primarily on ice.
So we thought it'd be useful to go through a few heuristics that you can look at when you're trying to build an Oldhim deck. The first one, you should really try to make at least half of your deck be blue pitch cards. He is so resource intensive that the more cards that you're able to play just using 1 card to pitch or being able to activate his ability with just 1 card, it's really, really going to help you in the long run. You do not want to be having to pitch 2 or even 3 cards just to get 1 attack off, because that's going to really hamper your ability to block on your opponent's turn and do anything else to interact. The second is It's really helpful for Fuse if you are able to focus on one of the two essences of each hero. I mean, this applies to all heroes, but for Oldhim, we're particularly talking about right now. And as we said, the Earth commons are not going to be that great. And so unless you just get a sick pool with a bunch of Earth rares and Majestics, the primary focus should probably be Ice with Oldhim. And that takes us to number 3. Make sure that there is a balance in your deck between fusion cards and cards that help them fuse. So with Oldhim, you're going to want ice cards, and then you're going to want ice fusion cards. And you should probably keep those in roughly equal proportions, because otherwise you're going to wind up with ice cards that may not be quite as powerful as your guardian attacks. And then you might wind up with guardian attacks that you can't power up using the fusion abilities. The next one is pay attention to cards that are great without fusion. I mean, Oldhim still gets massive attacks out there, and I mean, 10 damage is 10 damage. And honestly, sometimes I'd prefer if you didn't have Dominate on it and kind of induce your opponent to try to block with 3 or 4 cards and just take an entire turn off and let you set up again to hit them next turn. Anyway, to encourage your opponent to get cards out of their hand is huge. As we said, in a game with a hand size of 4 cards, that's 25% of their ability to do anything. And last but not least, try to cap the number of cards in your deck that cost 4 or more, cards that would require you to pitch 2 to be able to pay for them. And you really should pay attention to ones that are good without fusion, because those are going to be the ones that are really, really difficult to pitch and be able to fuse with your last card in hand. I would say 4 to 5 is a pretty good number for this. And if you get more than that, there's too much of a risk that you're going to wind up with multiple of those in your hand, not be able to play them all. So if you do wind up with more than that, I would be a little bit more aggressive about just using them to block, using them to pitch. Like, you don't have to set up the giant attacks every single time, because you're just not going to be able to. So those are our main heuristics. Michael, do you want to talk about how do you end a game with Oldhim?
Well, you do what Guardian does best, Andy, and that is that you swing out hard. So Glacial Footsteps is kind of the marquee card that comes to mind. We both got a lot of fun out of this card this past Sunday. As you can see, it's insane. It hits for 10 damage. And it also, again, if you ever do get the upside of giving it Ice Fusion, it gains Dominate as well. So a lot of the times you're able to come over the top for, in this format, at least 7 damage. And if you haven't done any other setup to give it any more damage. So another example of that is Thump. It's just a Guardian attack action that swings for 6. And if you do any pump, like you can with some of the Earth cards that we showed you before, or any other number of ways like Invigorate to give it any extra damage, it gains Dominate as well. So it's not quite as expensive, but it does have the potential to swing out for tons of damage. And so a good plan for how to do this is you want to just play out the game, getting in your attacks where you can, getting advantage where you can, and maintaining tempo with things like discard, hand control, and arsenal things. But your goal is to get your opponent to a life total where something like Thump or Glacial Footsteps is going to be able to finish them off. And then keep your own life total high enough where you can absorb a hit and still be able to keep enough cards in hand to go off for the win. So kind of do some calculus to figure out how much life you can get away with sacrificing, and then turn around and swing out as big as possible. And this might sound like, well, yeah, of course it's nice to have more life than the opponent and not block and swing out for a whole lot. But you'd be surprised. There are 0 common defense reactions to play around in this format. But it is important to remember that if you're playing it in the Oldhim mirror, assume that they're going to be able to pitch an Earth card and prevent 2 damage. So, maybe try to calculate for that as well. If you're thinking, oh, I'm going to be able to swing for, 10 Dominate and they've only got 7 life, I'm good. That's not necessarily true if you're playing Oldhim. Yeah, with that, that's kind of how you can look to end the game and what a typical deck looks like. What's next?
So I would say for us and probably for the listeners, practice. Mm-hmm. I know the set releases tomorrow. We've got some boxes on the way that we're going to use to do a lot more sealed events or sealed builds. Hopefully try to squeeze in a draft or two, because I know that's also going to be part of the calling format. A really good way to, if you're just starting out, to build some of these decks and start to internalize some of these concepts is to use the Blitz decks. They make one for every hero, every set. They are like $10, and it has a lot of the main commons and uncommon, or commons, rares, and even a couple majestics that each hero really tries to take advantage of. And it gives you a good sense for kind of pacing with the hero, strengths and weaknesses of the hero. And if you start to buy some packs, play some other limited events, and just start to collect cards, a really good way to start building toward a more competitive constructed deck is to just start with a Blitz deck and make upgrades as you see fit. If you do that, or if you're just playing other limited events, let us know how it goes. We are going to tell you every time we do anything fun with any of these cards. But we'd love to hear other people's experiences, and I'm sure we could learn from you as much as you guys are learning from us. So that's pretty much it for this video. What do we have coming up next?
So this was Oldhim, and the next thing, we're going to cover the other two heroes. We're looking forward to figuring out how we can build the best Lexi deck, or how we can build the best Briar deck. But also, more importantly, if you found this video useful, please let us know by liking the video or subscribing to the channel. And my personal favorite, comment down below. Like Andy said, if you build a deck or you do a sealed pool with friends, let us know how it goes. So that's it for this video. Again, I'm Michael, and you can find me being okay at games sometimes on Twitch at twitch.tv/mesheptv. Look here for the spelling, and you can find me there.
I'm Andy. I ramble incoherently on Twitter sometimes at Andy Plays FAB, Flesh and Blood. We also have a Twitter page for the show. That's at The Bobbleheads, BAUBLE.
What a confidence-inspiring pitch for ourselves. So I guess that's a wrap then. Until next time, I'm Michael.
I'm Andy.
And this has been another episode of Bobbleheads. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.